Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley, Part 3, Sheila Birling's Interrogation. So you may have read, watched or studied this play before in school, and as a result you're using this video to revise for an upcoming assessment or for some deeper analysis about Sheila. In this video I will go over the plot of Sheila's interrogation, look at Sheila as a character, explore some key themes, contexts and Sheila quotes you may want to memorise for your assessment, and I'll leave you with a Sheila focused exam style question you can answer if you want some writing practice. So, what happens in Sheila Birling's interrogation? Well, I'm calling Part 3 Sheila Birling's interrogation the section from the stage direction Sheila has now entered to when Gerald is startled and says, "What?" I'm considering that Part 3. Sheila enters the dining room and Inspector Gould informs her of Eva Smith's suicide. Sheila is shocked and she sympathises/empathises with Eva Smith. Inspector Gould then describes Eva's life of hardship after her father, Mr. Birling, fired her from his company and her lucky break at Millwoods. It's at this point the audience learns that Eva was also fired from Millwoods, and upon showing a photograph of Eva to Sheila, Sheila cries and runs off stage. When Sheila returns on stage a little later, she appears less childish and excitable than she was in Part 1, Sheila and Gerald's engagement, and she's now more mature and sincere since she's realised she's had a part to play in Eva Smith's demise. She accepts responsibility for the part she played, which was getting her fired from Millwoods. You can contrast this with her father, Arthur Birling, who refuses to accept responsibility. Sheila then admits or recounts how she wanted to try on a dress that did not suit her at Millwoods. However, the dress seemed to suit the shop assistant Eva Smith. Nevertheless, Sheila was stubborn and she insisted on trying on the dress, and as she was wearing it she caught Eva Smith smiling at her. We don't even know if it was like a positive smile or a negative smile, but Sheila, due to her insecurities, thought that Eva Smith was laughing at her, making fun of her, and she called the manager over and insisted that Eva Smith be fired, or else Sheila will close their family account at Millwoods. So presumably Sheila and her mum Sybil Birling shop there, and they spend a lot of money there. So in order to keep these customers, they fired Eva Smith, all because she smiled. Sheila regrets her actions and she vows never to do something like that again. And this shows the audience that she has changed. Unlike her father, who is stubborn and accepts no responsibility, she is open to change, and she has a sensitivity that her father lacks for Eva Smith. So, Sheila as a character, what's going on? Well, Sheila in Part 1, that I call Sheila and Gerald's engagement, she's presented as quite childish and excitable. We know this because she refers to her mother as Mummy and her father as Daddy, which is quite a childish term of endearment. And we know she's quite excitable, and you could argue a bit shallow, particularly when Gerald produces the engagement ring and she gets quite excited by this materialistic possession. However, in Part 3, Sheila's interrogation, when she realises what she's done to Eva Smith, and then has her little sob and cry and runs off stage, when she returns to the stage, she changes into a more mature and worldly individual, as she realises her actions have consequences for other people. What you've got to realise is Sheila's lived quite a sheltered life, so she really wouldn't have understood what it would have been like to be in Eva Smith's shoes, but this event has sort of exposed her to that, and she's grown up as a result. Sheila begins to show signs of her socialist nature. Now this aligns with Inspector Gould and with J.B. Priestley himself. And I believe Priestley wants to use Sheila as kind of like an inspiration to the audience. So it was performed in 1945, so we could refer to the audience as a post-war British audience. And I think Priestley was trying to appeal to the younger generation, and say that, you know, young people are the future of this country, and just like Sheila, you can change. You could go from your classist ways before and you could be more socialistic in terms of looking out for other Britons around you. Importantly, Sheila accepts responsibility and she wants to change, which is something her older generation father does not do. So that's in contrast with Sheila, who represents the younger generation. So speaking of this older-younger generation, that's a key theme in the play. The older generation is symbolised by Mr. Birling, Arthur Birling, and Mrs. Birling, Sybil Birling. And the younger generation is symbolised by Sheila Birling and Eric Birling, their children. Gerald Croft is awkwardly caught in the middle, so he's a little older than Sheila and Eric, but he's not quite as old as Mr. Birling and Mrs. Birling. And he shares Mr. Birling's sort of capitalistic view, and he is of upper class descent, like Mrs. Birling is. So in my opinion, he's slightly more aligned with the older generation than the younger generation, but because of his age and his interactions with Eva Smith, you could maybe argue he belongs more in the younger generation. Either way, I sort of see him in a third sort of separate bubble. He's neither the older nor the younger generation. What's important here is the older generation, Mr. and Mrs. Birling, cannot or refuse to change their ways. They both actually have very similar quotes along the lines of "I accept no responsibility." So this is clearly a refusal of another key theme, which is responsibility, both personal responsibility and social responsibility. Now, the younger generation, symbolised by Sheila and Eric, can and are willing to change their ways. And as I touched upon earlier, I really think Priestley is trying to appeal to his younger post-war British audience, and I think he wants to almost put Sheila up on a pedestal to shine a limelight on her and say, look, audience, you can be like Sheila. You may have been capitalistic in the past, you may have been classist in the past, but look, we've got a new Britain post-war. You could look out for the Eva Smiths and John Smiths of your world. You could be that change that he felt Britain needed to improve as a nation after World War II. So, what historical context could you bring into your essay writing about Sheila? Well, I would talk about hierarchy. I've got a definition here. Hierarchy is a system of ranking members in society based on power. So let's take a school, for example. There's a hierarchy with the head teacher at the top and then sort of senior teachers, teaching assistants, and there's sort of like an order. That's a hierarchy. Now, in Edwardian England, which is when the play is set in 1912, there was a clear social hierarchy. So at the top was the upper class, in the middle it's the middle class, and at the bottom was the working class. And it was impossible to scale this ladder if you wanted to do it. We call that social mobility. As a nation, we're much better at being socially mobile now compared to 100 years ago. There was also an age hierarchy in Britain at the time, where younger members of society did exactly what the older members of society told them to. So there was no sort of idea of young people with fresh ideas coming and changing. It was more a case of you listened to your elders and you did what they said. And this led to something called entrenched problems, which is basically, let's say my father and mother taught me something that may be deemed wrong. Because they taught it to me, when I have my own kids, I teach it to my kids because that's what my parents taught me and they had the power, and now I'm the parent, I have the power. And what happens is you end up passing on these mistakes from older generation to younger generation. And I think Priestley really wants the younger generation to think for themselves. So their parents were entrenched in classist and capitalistic viewpoints, and I think Priestley really wants his younger generation to think for themselves and maybe challenge these and break the cycle of entrenched hierarchical problems. There was also a clear gender hierarchy in Edwardian England, and this hierarchy was very imbalanced. So men had a lot of social power, and women had very little. So, for example, Sheila Birling, she would have been subject to her father's will. He would have had a say in who she marries, and of course he approves Gerald because of that business between Crofts Limited and Birling Co. Not only that, he would maybe have control over whether she worked or not, what sort of things she studied at school, perhaps. So she was effectively his property. And when she would have got married to Gerald, if their wedding goes ahead, she would then hand over all her legal rights and property to Gerald. So there was a very clear gender hierarchy, and women were at the bottom and men were at the top. But a little interesting piece of information is J.B. Priestley was actually a feminist, and he believed in empowering women, because during the war, World War One and World War Two in particular, when all the men were out fighting, the women had to sort of step up and fill their shoes in society and do the jobs and the roles that men used to do. And Priestley observed this and saw that women are just as good as men at doing things. And so he really championed feminism and female empowerment. So I think Sheila not only is meant to inspire the younger generations, but I think in particular younger females to sort of step up, maybe out of this sort of social hierarchical gender imbalance, and really shape and carve a new Britain where not only is there maybe no classism and more socialism, but maybe there's less of this age hierarchy and less of this gender hierarchy, more equality, which is a big component of socialist ideology. Okay, so what are some things Sheila says that you might want to memorise for an exam? Well, Sheila is described in the stage direction at the beginning as a pretty girl in her early 20s, very pleased with life and rather excited. So this is a great quote to show how she starts off the play in the beginning, and I love tracking Sheila as a character, so that means following her throughout the play and seeing how she changes, because I think she has one of the more dramatic character arcs. She's really chalk and cheese, completely different at the start of the play and at the end of the play. Sheila says, "Oh, Gerald, you've got it. Is it the one you wanted me to have?" It here is referring to the wedding ring, and she clearly has no say over it. It's the ring Gerald wanted her to have, and it shows she's quite materialistic, she's quite shallow, she's naive, excited over this ring. A little later on she says, "Look, mummy, isn't it a beauty?" And that term of endearment, mummy, is a bit odd for someone in their mid-20s. You would have thought mum or mother would have been more appropriate. What business? What's happening? This is interesting because it shows her curiosity. Maybe she doesn't want to be in that sort of middle upper class female bubble of, just wanting to get married. She's interested in the world, what's happening around her. She asks questions. Oh, how horrible. This is her reaction to hearing Eva Smith's suicide. Was it an accident? Again, this question, this interrogative, shows a curiosity, which I think Priestley was trying to get across to his young female audience. Be curious, be active in the world. I can't help thinking about this girl destroying herself so horribly. So this reveals Sheila's sensitivity, her sense of empathy and sympathy, which the older generation, her parents, don't have. Instead, they look at Eva Smith as a troublemaker or girls of that class, whereas the younger generation can sympathise. The age gap between Sheila and Eva probably isn't a great deal, so the only thing separating these two women and their fates really is their class, so they're more relatable to each other. This is a great Sheila quote, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. I would explore the word labour and contrast it with people. So we know the upper classes saw the working class basically as a means to an end, as factory workers for their profit. And Sheila is challenging that. She's challenging her father about that. This is another stage direction in italics. Recognising it with a little cry, gives a half-stifled stop and then runs out. This is Sheila's reaction to seeing Inspector Gould's photo of Eva Smith. When she calms down and returns to the room, there's this question, so I'm really responsible. She is willing to accept responsibility, unlike her father. So this is part of Sheila's confession of what she did. I went to the manager at Millwoods and I told him if they didn't get rid of that girl being Eva Smith, I'd never go near that place again. So she used her upper class and her financial power to have Eva Smith fired. I caught sight of her smiling at the assistant. This was Eva Smith's crime. This is what she did against Sheila. She smiled, and that lost her job. Because I was in a furious temper, in my opinion, that temper's probably born out of an insecurity. It was my own fault, so she's willing to accept responsibility, which is good. I'll never do it again. That repetition of never, and to anybody, regardless of class, of gender, of age. She's seeing things more socialistically. She's seeing everyone as human beings. Okay, so you might want to practice writing about Sheila. First of all, you want to take some notes from this video on a copy of your play, and then you could try answering this question. How does Sheila's reaction to Inspector Gould's interrogation differ from her father's reaction to his interrogation in Act 1 of An Inspector Calls. Now remember, both Sheila's interrogation and Arthur Birling's interrogation both happen in Act 1. You would need to write some comparative paragraphs, and I would argue that they have different reactions. Sheila accepts responsibility, Arthur Birling does not accept responsibility. Sheila shows signs of sympathy, Arthur Birling does not show any signs of sympathy to Eva Smith. Sheila's willing to change, Arthur Birling's not willing to change. So you need to select quotes for both Sheila and Arthur, and then you'd need to put them in a comparative paragraph saying Sheila is reacting this way, however, whereas in contrast, on the other hand, Arthur's reacting this way. And you can start analysing your quotes and exploring the different reactions of Sheila and Arthur to their interrogations in Act 1 of An Inspector Calls. Well, if you found this video useful, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to my Mr. Hardy channel so you get the rest of my An Inspector Calls analytical videos, and feel free to leave a comment, particularly if it's about Sheila that you want to share. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.